Hello and welcome to another episode of What's for Dinner. Tonight we'll be cooking a Szechuan-inspired pepper orange beef, featuring Szechuan peppercorns, sweet soy sauce, crispy beef, some orange sauce, and a few other ingredients. My goal from the outset was to see if I could turn this, which is not very good stuff, into something that is very good stuff. This recipe does feature a few specialty ingredients that you can probably find at any Asian grocery store, but if you can't find them, go ahead and follow the link in the description. It'll take you to the Fire and Steel website where this recipe is written down, and inside that recipe you can find some links specifically for those two ingredients I just mentioned. That'll take you to Amazon where you can purchase these things online. So, all that said, let's go ahead and get into the cooking.
We have a good 2-act recipe today, and when I say 2-act recipe, what I mean is that you'll prep everything ahead of time, you can stop and pause and go take care of whatever you have to, and then come back and finish the meal. This is great if there's a lot going on in your house in the evenings, like you're taking care of kids, getting them fed, getting them put to bed, which is the case in our house. These are those Szechuan peppercorns I talked about in the intro. We're going to go ahead and just give these a light bit of grinding up. You don't have to do this, but if you bite into one of them, the flavor is really intense. And I like that, my wife does not. So we compromise and I give them kind of a light grinding and a little mortar and pestle here. So next up, we're going to go ahead and get all the aromatics for the dish sorted out. We're going to be using ginger, jalapenos, garlic, and lemongrass. So here for the ginger, I'm just going to mince it. I'm cutting it into sticks, then cross-cutting it very finely, and then we'll run the knife through one more time just to break it down a little bit further. Next up, we have the lemongrass. This can be a little bit difficult to find, but I can get it in my grocery store, so I'm sure most people can get it in theirs. And this is very fibrous and very tough, but very flavorful. So I'm just slicing it, but you want to slice it really, really thin. Any large pieces of lemongrass can be kind of difficult to chew and eat. Next up, we have one whole jalapeno. If you don't like spice, you can go ahead and omit this. If you really like spice, you can add even more if you'd like, or any more intense kind of pepper. For this, for a jalapeno, I'm just going to slice it. I want fairly large pieces because I want that kind of spice to really pop when you bite into it. I don't want it to just be kind of a base level heat throughout the dish. You can see a lot of the aromatics in this are left fairly large because I want real strong flavors bite to bite. Finally, we have the garlic, and just like with the jalapenos, I'm just going to go ahead and slice these thin. Garlic is one of those things, the more you cut it up, the stronger the flavor is. But then the flavor ends up just kind of being throughout the dish where, like I said, I want strong flavors and I want a slight variation from one bite to the next. With the aromatics finished off, we'll go ahead and turn our attention to our vegetables. Here you can see I've already peeled the onions, and I'm finishing up the last bell pepper here, and then we're just going to go ahead and julienne pretty much everything. Having a variety of colors of peppers is pretty nice too. Not only does it make the dish look a little bit better, but green peppers tend to have more of a green grassy flavor, where the colored variations tend to be a little bit sweeter. Here with the celery, I'm just cross-cutting it. You don't have to do the bias cut if you don't like to. Again, I think if you're making it for yourself, doesn't mean that it shouldn't look nice. And then finally, our last veggie is going to be this cabbage here. I don't want a whole lot of cabbage. This isn't going to be, there's already a lot of other vegetables. The cabbage is there, almost just as filler. This would be kind of a low-carb dinner for us in our house. We're not going to serve this with rice or noodles or anything. So the cabbage kind of occupies that spot. And here you can see I'm cutting it very thin. That's because I want to be able to cook everything very quickly. Cabbage takes a little bit longer to cook than everything else, so I don't want everything to be held up by waiting for the cabbage to get tender and soft enough to eat. Alright, the last little bit of prep we're going to do before we start the second act of this recipe is to cook off the crispy beef itself. Now, this is avocado oil, and that is not my regular grapeseed oil. If you've been keeping up with the Fire and Steel website, I just wrote an article about why that is, why I'm no longer using grapeseed oil, and I've made a switch to this. Big benefit of the avocado oil, it has an incredibly high smoke point. It's really good for high heat cooking like this. So you want enough avocado oil. Normally I would put a lot more oil in the pan, but this stuff's fairly expensive, so I'm trying to use just as much as I need. And you'll see a little bit later that was kind of not the best call, but I worked around it. So here, this is my grocery store market. This is stir-fry beef, but it's just any kind of thinly sliced beef. You could cut it yourself, but if you can find a pre-cut like this, why not? And then this is just cornstarch. There's no seasoning in this at all. There's going to be a lot of flavors in the sauce and with the veggies and the aromatics, so the beef doesn't really need a whole lot just to be cooked off and crispy. And I'm putting each piece in individually. That's important because you want each piece to get a nice coating of cornstarch. If you just dump the whole package in the cornstarch, you're going to have a real hell of a time getting all the pieces broken up and then evenly coated. This takes like an extra maybe minute or two, and it makes a really big difference in the end. So with the oil hot and all the beef evenly coated, you can see I brushed a little bit of the extra cornstarch off just so we don't put too much in the pan, and then lay them flat individually, and then we're going to go ahead and fry these off. Now for this frying process, there's two things that are really important. The first is that I'm only doing 4 pieces at a time. Only do as much as your wok will tolerate. You don't want to crowd the pan. For multiple reasons. The beef will stick to itself, the oil will drop in temperature too much. It's just better. It's going to take a little bit longer, but the end product's going to be a lot better if you just take your time. The other thing is I'm not really touching these that much. You can see I'm kind of nudging them so they don't stick to one another, but I'm letting them cook entirely before I flip them. And I don't know how well this is going to come across in the video, but you can see here there's just a faint amount of browning right around the edge of each piece. That's a good indicator that they're ready to be flipped. And here you can see when I flip this first piece, it's the most obvious. It's got a nice golden brown color starting to develop. And once they're flipped over, I'm going to go ahead and cook them for about another minute and a half, and then probably flip them back over one more time just to make sure they're nice and crispy. And here you can see they've developed a much darker brown color, and you can see when I hold it by one end, it stood out rigidly. That's what I'm looking for. That's going to give it a good texture. It's going to have just the right amount of crunch, and it's going to hold up to the sauce that we're going to put on everything later. Here you can see I'm kind of jiggling the wok a little bit. That's another good way to just gently move them around the pan. So here you can see I'm getting towards the end of the process, and my wok is looking really, really grody. I should have put a lot more oil in there to begin with, but again, avocado oil, that bottle was about $8. I'm not trying to just throw this stuff away. So a little bit more oil does not hurt. If you would find yourself in this same situation, please feel free to add a little bit more oil, or even dump it out and start over. And there you can see the wok is looking really, really scary right there towards the end, but we did make it. So this would be the end of the first act, if you will. You can stop, just as I did, and completely restart from there. Now here, I actually lost some footage. First time I've ever lost a little bit of footage. Here, what I have in this wok right now is some avocado oil, some sesame oil, my Szechuan peppercorns, my aromatics, and then a little bit of dried orange peel. This is kind of the orange kick in this recipe. So I was frying everything off, not for too long, for maybe about a minute total, before I realized that the camera wasn't recording. So with all of our aromatics and our spices cooked off a little bit, we're going to go ahead and add in our onions and begin the process of getting all our veggies in the pan. So once you add the onions in, be quick to stir everything around because you don't want those aromatics to burn. Those Szechuan peppercorns can and will burn if you let them. So the onions will help suck some of that heat out of the pan and prevent that. Here you can see the onions are starting to get a little translucent, a little bit soft. That means it's almost time to add in our next veggie. And much like my chili beef stir fry video, this recipe is all about adding the ingredients in the correct order. So next up is going to be celery because it's going to take slightly less longer than the onions to cook, but longer than everything else. Just toss that through and let it continue to cook for about 2 more minutes. Once the celery starts to soften up just a little bit, we're going to go ahead and add in all the cabbage. And as usual, cabbage kind of crowds the pan. Just go ahead and start tossing it continuously. It'll start to absorb some of that heat. It'll start to wilt down a little bit. Though to help it in that wilting process, I'm going to go ahead and start adding some of the flavor, and I'm going to add in a little bit of soy sauce. The soy sauce is going to flash into steam, and that's going to help wilt down and cook the cabbage. Now, when you do add soy sauce, though, you do want to be aware that if it dries out entirely, it will burn. So once you get that soy sauce in there, keep mixing it continuously until you see some moisture start to come out of the veggies. So finally, we're going to go ahead and add in our bell peppers. These I want to add in right towards the end because bell peppers, when they overcook, they get a really mushy, unpleasant texture. So we're almost finished with this. So get the bell peppers in, get them tossed all the way through, and then we're going to go ahead and start building our sauce. Now this is the dirty secret. This is the General Tso's, no, it's not General Tso's, it's Panda Express orange sauce that I had in my cupboard for reasons I don't know. My goal when I made this recipe was to try to figure out, could I turn that sauce into a decent meal? And I think I did that today. So the orange sauce in, a little bit of the sweet soy sauce, a little bit of garlic chili paste. You can find this next to the sriracha in your grocery store. It's kind of like sriracha, but it doesn't have sugar in it, so it's a little more chili and vinegar rather than kind of a just all-around condiment. So go ahead and get that tossed through. It seems like it's going to be really thick and syrupy, but once it heats up, the sauce kind of loosens up a little bit. So while the sauce comes to a simmer in the pan, we're going to go ahead and slice up some scallions. These are a garnish because they look nice, but don't skip them. That fresh, bright green flavor really helps balance out the really strong, heavy flavors of the dish. So you can kind of hear that slight burble. That means it's time to add in the beef. Just slide it all in and then carefully give it a quick toss. If you've got the wrist action to toss the whole thing, be my guest, but you can move it around with the tongs like this. And you just want to make sure the beef gets completely coated, completely evenly distributed throughout the entire dish. We're going to go ahead and let that simmer for about maybe a minute, just so that it heats the beef all the way through. Everything is already cooked, so you don't really have to worry about cooking the beef now. Go ahead, give it a taste, determine if it needs anything else. I thought it needed a little bit more salt, a little bit more spice, but that's my personal preference. You don't have to add those. And give that one more toss through, and we're basically done. So go ahead and get this plated up. We're going to go ahead and finish this with a little bit of toasted sesame seeds. It's going to add kind of that nutty flavor, and then we're going to hit it with our scallions, and then we're going to call this dish finished. As always, please like, favorite, comment, and subscribe. I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.